All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we survey great theories of everything, do deep dives on them, usually all-encompassing theories from obscure sources that nobody knows about, but if they did, it would revolutionize their life. We did about 300 videos on the ancient Egyptian tree of life, almost 600 videos on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson and its offshoots. And today is the 31st video that we've checked out here on Daniel Ingram and his book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And you could say that it's all about Buddhism, but it's basically about meditation, insight meditation, which is a Buddhist meditation, but really you're just investigating the reality right in front of yourself. It's a method to kind of understand the territory and the procedure that you're supposed to be going through in order to become enlightened and suffering for yourself. I guess the disclaimer is I haven't done that for myself yet, but it comes in stages, and it's an achievable goal. And by studying it, you can put yourself in the position. You still have to execute. You still have to have the discipline. But, it's kind of like you don't have the answers, but at least now you have the questions. And, most people don't have either. So, you have the means to get the answers now that you know the questions. So I guess that's a little bit analogous to what's going on here. Now I think we're in either chapter 26 or 27 of this book, and the beginning of part 3, which is on more or less the jhanas, J-H-A-N-A. Those are basically like the states of attention that you can get in, or trance states. When you meditate of either kind, concentration meditation or insight meditation, you can progress through these various jhanas. Maybe a little bit like a video game. You master one screen and then you get to go to the next screen. Not quite like that, but we are about to start a section here called the first jhana. So this is a description of what happens after basically access concentration, which he talked about earlier. You have to kind of at least get yourself like in front of the door. That's kind of access concentration, and then going into the jhanas is kind of like walking through doors. Another analogy that I just made up off the top of my head that may not be correct, but it seems right to me right now. Okay, the first jhana. The first jhana, in its fundamental aspect, is about the application of effort, the beginnings of phenomena, and the center of attention. You direct your attention to any of the 6 sense doors. That's our 5 senses, along with our mental processes, thinking. And when you do this, you perceive an object of meditation arising where you looked for it. You direct your attention again. There is another impression of something, which you are encouraged to perceive as being the same discrete object if you are trying to develop concentration, or as the ever-changing set of sensations if you are trying to train in insight. During each moment in which you direct your attention, you can perceive something. Thus, effort pays off in the first jhana. You can finally meditate. There are the things you are supposed to be paying attention to. You turn attention to the breath. There is the breath. And you can keep your attention on it. You turn your attention to thoughts. There they are. You turn attention to the feet. There they are. There is something really nice about our concentration finally being this strong and reliable. And this can cause a sense of happiness and contentment. Though if we are using non-physical objects such as a visualization or very abstract objects that are far removed from physical sensations, you might not notice the physical sensations of happiness, well-being, or bliss that can accompany the first jhana if you are focusing on objects other than those qualities. This can be very confusing for some people, trying to map progress in the jhanas who yet may be deeply into jhana. For example, if you are focusing entirely on the color white, your attention might be so tuned away from your physical body that bliss and rapture might be absent from your experience, even though you might be solidly in the first jhana. This applies to the later jhanas as well. Regardless of whether you feel anything blissful, it is nice to no longer be mucking about in the early stages of meditation and instead be finally getting somewhere. The first jhana is not particularly fast, nor is it broadly inclusive generally. If you are visualizing a red dot, there it is, bright and clear. If you are noting, you note the breath, second after second. You can stay with it while attention is focused on it. If you are reciting a mantra, you can stay with it while effort is directed to it. That said, the first jhana tends to be unstable initially, reverting to the pre-jhanic, less stable mode of attention until we get good at it. This is a formal list of the flaws of the first jhana. It requires effort. It can easily revert to pre-jhanic attention modes. And it is relatively narrow, being just about the object of attention rather than things like the space the object occupies, the background sensations, and the sensations that seem to form the sense of subject. However, it beats the pants off the mode of attention that preceded it. A digression about the jhanas. Various people and schools of practice have widely varying standards for what they consider the first jhana and the rest of them, and thus different ways of describing and diagnosing it and others. I realize that high standards can be very useful at times, just as low standards can be useful at times. I remember an interview with a meditation teacher who is known for her natural, deep concentration abilities and high standards for the jhanas. During that very brief and quite tense interview, she said, "What famous jhana teacher would consider the fourth jhana? I wouldn't even consider access concentration." Let me say that again. What so-and-so teacher would consider the fourth jhana? I wouldn't even consider access concentration. I can see what she was getting at, but I think that having the attitude that the jhanas are something fundamental about attention that can be taken to wildly different depths of development, but still retain their essential jhanic qualities, is more helpful than drawing what are ultimately somewhat arbitrary lines and saying, only this very specific thing is this jhana, and the rest of the concentrated meditative states are not. Said another way, I prefer a more dimensional than categorical classification of jhana. For instance, some would suggest that a certain jhana should last for a certain arbitrary period to be classified as that jhana, or should be developed to a certain very specific, ultimately arbitrary degree of depth or focus to be classified as that jhana. However, I think this misses the basic point that the jhanas are very large baskets in which we can develop practice in all sorts of wonderful and amazing ways, while retaining the core nature of being some basic jhana. Thinking this way requires the ability to accommodate shades of gray along multiple axes of development. And that sort of agile, nuanced thinking is not something everyone does well, including some deep jhana practitioners and extremely intelligent Dharma scholars. I have spent considerable time in both very light, superficial, relatively short-lived jhanic modes of attention, as well as very deep, rock-steady, long-lasting, and extremely refined jhanic modes of attention using a wide variety of objects. While superficially, these experiences couldn't have seemed more different, and descriptions of them would seem dissimilar to the uninitiated, there is much to be said for being able to recognize their shared elements. Doing that helps us to navigate in worlds of experience that otherwise can be significantly more confusing. It also helps us understand others' descriptions of their own experiences. Lastly, it is worth getting good at recognizing the gross and subtle core elements of the quality and depth of attention that characterizes the jhanic baskets across a wide range of objects, as this helps us to become more mindful of them, which in turn helps us investigate them and understand their true nature directly for ourselves. Okay, this section is called the second jhana. The second jhana is an improvement over the first in that significantly less effort is required to keep the attention on the meditation object, and clarity is increased. The descriptive phrase in the tradition is, quote, with the dropping of applied and sustained thought or effort, one abides in the second jhana. But it does take some little bit of attention to stay with it, depending on how solidly it is developed and exactly which phase of the second jhana you are in. More on the sub-jhanas in a bit. The second jhana is the phase where jhanic qualities and side benefits begin to show up on their own. And meditation seems much more something that happens than something you must make happen. This significant decrease in the mental processing power required to keep the attention on the object of meditation makes it a lot easier to perceive clearly, such that details of the object that previously may have been unclear tend to appear much more clearly, and the object tends to seem more interesting, rich, nuanced, and complex. In fact, in the second jhana, the center of attention is the clearest of all the jhanas, with the most fine-grained resolution and greatest brightness of mind. You would think it would be the higher jhanas about which this is the case, but strangely it is not. The later jhanas add elements that the second jhana lacks, such as space, background, and the like. But the second jhana is the star when it comes to centralized, focused clarity and ability to discern subtle details with respect to the meditation object itself. Attention in the second jhana is generally just a bit broader than that of the first. But this phase is still about characteristics in the general area of the center of attention, in contrast with the third and fourth jhanas, which are much broader and more inclusive of the periphery of attention. This description could confuse some people, as bliss and rapture might fill your body diffusely in the second jhana, making some people think this jhana's attentional strengths are wider than they are. Okay, let's try this again. This description could confuse some people, like me. This description could confuse some people, as bliss and rapture might fill your body diffusely in the second jhana, making some people think this jhana's attentional strengths are wider than they are. However, one paying careful attention will notice that the total volume of that bliss you can notice in any instant is much smaller than in the later jhanas, a fact that also applies to the first jhana. Phase-wise, whereas in the first jhana, focus is naturally a bit more on the beginnings of objects, the second jhana's natural strength is from just after the beginning to near the end, meaning the middle of each sensation's brief, transient occurrence. The increased ease of staying with the object of meditation and the general increase in clarity of the broad middle of each object's occurrence makes this stage much more enjoyable than the first jhana, and in terms of rich enjoyment tends to be the best of the first four. The later jhanas have other redeeming qualities, but at least in terms of fun and pleasure, the second jhana is generally the best of the standard 8 extended, compounded, and unusual jhanas accepted. However, if you are using some very non-somatic object, such as a visualization or mantra, you might not notice the pleasure much or at all, just that something about the meditation feels better, clearer, more stable, easier. Just as with the first jhana and the rest, this can be developed to a huge range of depths. All right, this section is called the third jhana. The third jhana is significantly different from the first and second in many ways, and is probably the most important jhana to understand, since it basically turns everything you think about meditation and progress on its head, thus causing endless confusion and frustration for meditators who don't know what it is about and what to look for, and even for plenty who do. From a certain perspective, understanding the third jhana is the key to mastery. Whether that mastery is of concentration practice, insight practice, or a fusion of the two. Some of you might ask here, but what about the fourth? Well, if you attain the third, the fourth, strangely, is no big deal in comparison. And if you don't discern what is so different about the third, you are unlikely to attain the fourth, particularly if you are the sort of person to force things into narrow boxes and categorical ways of perceiving things. If you are naturally able to broaden and relax into it rather than forcing it, then the mind will probably not be a big deal for you. I'm sorry, then the third will probably not be a big deal for you. But if you can't relax into it, then giving a lot of attention to this section will pay off in large ways and is essential for real progress into the higher modes of attention. The problem with the third jhana is that it is broad, and not just broad, but sensations at the center of attention also tend to be the least clear of any of the jhanas. This can be extremely confusing for those who wish to keep looking at the center of attention for answers, since in the third jhana, this is not where the party is. The party is in the periphery of attention, those areas around the center of attention, but we may tend to think of good attention as being one-pointed, tightly focused, and the like, because that way of working served us so well in the first two jhanas, and because we generally are woefully underdeveloped at paying attention as broadly as the third jhana demands. Most people have a lot of work to do to learn how to get what the third jhana is about, either phenomenologically or conceptually. I have often wondered if many hours of watching a screen rather than walking in forests, listening to and watching what is all around us might contribute attentional conditioning that makes the first two jhanas easier and the later two harder. Now, he's saying the first four jhanas are the ones with form, and the fifth through eighth jhanas are unformed, but they're basically kind of like mirror reflections, so they're related anyway, analogous, and so that's why he's saying the first two and the second two, or the later two. In addition to the spatial or geometric problem of the breadth of the third jhana, there is also the phase problem in it, which is more of a subtle, perceptual, and even temporal problem. Specifically, attention seems out of phase in the third jhana, such as those who were seeing things arise and manifest with great clarity in the second jhana may now notice that everything seems to be just vanishing when you are most looking for it, as the third jhana's natural strength involves clarity regarding the end of sensations, which is the direct antithesis of the first and second jhanas, in which every time you look for something, there it is, or even better, it just shows up clearly without much or any work at all. When faced with these unexpected attention and phase problems, which by their nature are not generally clear to most practitioners beyond a sense that something is attentionally different or wrong feeling, most meditators regress and attempt to apply the first jhana way of working involving strong effort to a problem that requires even more the reverse of that than the second jhana did. In the second jhana, you could relax, or at least not be nearly as effortful, and jhanic qualities and the object of attention would just manifest. However, in the third, you must let phenomena in the center of attention not quite be there, not really be clear, not really be present, and allow the phase problem to just do its weird out-of-phase thing. Since if you try to force it to be something it is not, then like a Chinese finger trap that just gets tighter as you pull it harder, it won't let you win that way. It would be like trying to calm a pool of water by patting down each ripple. This very subtle, broad, gentle way of working is counterintuitive for many and hard for most, even when they are told about how to adjust their attention until they get the hang of it. After the glory of natural, easy, focused, centralized clarity that is the second, the third jhana's broad, diffuse, and out-of-phase vagueness can really be an adjustment. The third jhana's tagline might be, go broad or go home. Despite our ideals of steady, focused, one-pointedness, the third jhana is a significantly more sophisticated form of attention. Learning how to pay attention in it is the necessary setup for the fourth jhana. We learned a lot about the center of attention and about objects over there in the first and second jhanas, but the third jhana begins to include spacious elements, however initially vague, and peripheral and background elements, however initially unclear. Without learning about spacious sensations in the background, you won't be able to put your whole experience field together in the way the fourth jhana does, and thus won't get the complete picture of what is going on. For those of you who read and practice from John Yates or Kula Dasa's material, the first two jhanas teach you a lot about what he terms attention. The third jhana teaches you a lot about what he terms awareness. And the fourth jhana teaches you how to combine these together in a balanced and complete way. Further, for those who get the feel of the third jhana, the vague, diffuse, out-of-phaseness gives the third jhana its best elements, which are equanimity filled, subtly blissful, cool, and restful. That said, these elements are not as easy for most to detect as the positive aspects of the first and second jhanas, which tend to be more obvious since they are coarser. For those who can appreciate the third jhana's strengths, they are found to be preferable even to the fun elements of the second. The third jhana, in its more shamatha form, is marked by a pervasive, restful, deeper, more open, easier, and calmer bliss than the second, like being submerged in a pleasantly cool pool at twilight. However, for those who are in more of an insight mode, these classic jhanic factors, so often associated with the third jhana in the texts, may seem a million miles away. Here is one of the more pronounced areas where the insight and concentration maps diverge. More on that later when we talk about the stages of insight generally referred to as knowledges of suffering, aka the dark night. Also, if we are using objects that are not somatic, such as visualization objects or a refined object like the breath of attention of that jhana, the cool, restful bodily bliss may be subtle or even absent, as the mind is focused elsewhere. Okay, that's the end of the third jhana. Let's see how we're doing time-wise. Let's try to finish this, the fourth jhana. As stated earlier, the fourth jhana is where everything coalesces. The ability to clearly perceive the center of attention is combined with the ability to perceive the periphery of attention. And then a volumetric or spacious element is filled out in a way that it wasn't before. And more than that, an integrative element as well as a very direct element. While the third jhana generally involves more appreciation of volumetric aspects of our experience than the first two, the fourth jhana improves on this substantially. The fourth jhana is inclusive, accommodating, and much broader and much and more even in its treatment of experience in general terms than any of the previous jhanas. It is not that attention can't focus narrowly in this jhana, as it can, but its natural spatial shape is very different from this. The fourth jhana has a more thorough or more through and through vibe to it. Through the center where the subject seems to be, through the outside where the objects seem to be, and in general to more even in its treatment of anything that arises in experience. In particular, emotions, the sense doors, and everything that seems to be us. That said, it lacks the fine resolution of the second jhana, and those who go looking for that in the fourth are likely to miss the opportunity to see that the fourth jhana is a substantially more sophisticated way of perceiving sensate reality than everything that came before it. Just as in the second jhana, where things were clearer as less effort was required, the more the fourth comes into its own, the less we seem to be doing anything, and thus the whole field of attention can show itself directly to us in some substantially less filtered, less processed, more direct way. The hallmark of the fourth jhana is equanimity, though certain emphases in practice may not play up this quality as strongly as in others, and when equanimity really develops, it may not be all that noticeable. Bliss, rapture, happiness, as well as pain and strange occurrences may all stand out in the earlier stages, but equanimity may just feel normal and undramatic, making it subtle at times or so unremarkable that people may miss it. It is generally described as having a neutral feeling tone, though paradoxically, there can be something really nice about the flavor and tone of that neutrality. Why is it that very pure water can taste great even though it has no obvious taste at all? That is the sort of pleasant neutrality that we find in the fourth jhana. The issue of mindfulness in the fourth jhana is an interesting one, and the old texts say that mindfulness is considered present, but may not predominate in the way it did in previous jhanas. Just as when watching an engrossing movie, there is a natural attention to the movie, but we might be so lost in the story that to call ourselves mindful might be somehow inaccurate. The same applies to mindfulness in the fourth jhana. Fourth is integrative in a way that the previous jhanas are not, in the sense that it points to everything being encompassed in the same mode of attention. All the sense doors